Let's work with some conditional logic. If statements. I'm going to work a little bit faster in this tutorial, so if you need to pause or slow the video down to catch some of the code that I'm typing in, feel more than free to do so. Before we start, I want us to toggle one setting to help us in the code that we're writing. I'll show you something here. Let's just say I add an integer for number, set it to 0, and I start typing in number. NetBeans automatically references me to the name of the variable I've already created as an autocomplete feature. Sometimes it glitches a little bit, so if you need to fix it, head up to Tools, go down to Options, and under Code Completion, everything that you see checked for me should be checked for you, but even then sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes what you need to do is to click on just Java under Languages and enable this, auto pop-up on typing any Java identifier part. You might not have that setting enabled. And once you do that, just hit OK, and now you should be able to see the autocomplete for variables being typed in, which might help you save some time as you have more and more variables in your project. So something that I want to do in this project is actually gather some information from the user so we can test out a few different conditions. So I'm going to use the first real library import of our review section and gather a scanner. This is a pre-made Java class that allows us to scan information from the user. So I'm going to call this just a scanner. And as we need to do when we're defining classes, we'll talk more about this in a future tutorial, but we're familiar with this if you studied before. It's a new scanner. And then inside the constructor, I need to actually add one thing, system.in. And it's still upset with me because the scanner class needs to be imported still. So if you mouse over, you'll notice it says Alt-Enter shows hints. So I press Alt-Enter, and I'm actually going to be able to add an import for the scanner, which will autofill it in up here. And now I have it. It is now a library that's a part of my project that I can use and work with. So what am I going to do with my scanner? Well, I'm actually going to, instead of setting number to equal 0, I'm actually going to set it to some number that my scanner gathers. I'm going to say next int. We'll talk more about methods soon, but in this, when I press a dot after a object name, I get a big list of all of the methods or behaviors that this object has reference to. And there's a ton in this one, so for now, we're just going to go next int with the open and close bracket for that behavior. And what this means is that when my program starts, I can type in a number, and just to see that this is working, I'm going to print out that number to the screen. So let me run my program here really quick. And now when my program is running, I will see that it's actually not complete yet. It's waiting for some input. I'm going to type in the number 3. And it ended by printing out that number 3 again because I told it to print it out. So now I can gather a number from the user. Let's not have the printout anymore. I'm going to add a little bit of space, staying tabbed in to remember my syntax and style. And let's now use our first piece of conditional logic. Here's a reminder of how it works. We're going to say if open close bracket. And sometimes I like to just write the whole structure of this first before I add any content. After the if statement, I need to have 2 of these squiggly brackets for the body of the content that happens if this if statement is true. Because here's what our if statement is doing. It's checking for a true or false condition. Here's where we use some of our comparators. Our comparators are these things. Equals equals to check for equality, greater than, less than, greater than or equal to, and less than or equal to. We can also, actually I'll add this up front here, say not equal to. So this means it does equal, this means it doesn't equal. These are our comparators. It allows us to compare values and then have true or false conditions based off of those things. So what I want to do in this first condition is just say this number that the user types in, if this number, right now, let's just say it's greater than, well, let's go with maybe something to do with my age. If the number is greater than 34, I now, in these squiggly brackets, have the result. So if this is true, perform these behaviors. And because of the squigglies, I can add as many lines of code inside of it as I want, and it will all be contained in this condition. But here I just want one thing. I'm going to print out SOUT tab. Wow, you are older than me. Let's run this and see what happens. If I type in, let's say, the number 55, wow, you are older than me is printed out. However, if I type in a number equal to or less than 34, let's say 32, nothing is printed out. Why is that the case? Because this is only triggered if this is true. And since it resulted as false with the 32 input, it isn't printed. However, I could say if number is less than 34, I can say, huh, you are younger than me. And logically, I could also say if number equals 34, add in my squiggly brackets. Oops, my mouse is being glitchy here. Let me toggle it. We are the same age. Let's run this program again and see how the conditional logic plays out. So let's say I'm 16. Huh, you are younger than me. And if I run this again and type in 34, we are the same age. I suddenly have different branching pathways my program can follow by inserting these if statements, these conditions that have different scenarios that need to kind of logically match up with my, well, circumstance here. One more thing I might want to think about, if my number is less than 0, I want to print out liar. And maybe if number is greater than 100, maybe I say, I don't believe you, to cover a bunch of different situations. So there's a bunch of conditions for the logic of the input of an age. For good program design, I might actually want to clarify what the user's inputting from the start. So I might say, how old are you? Input below, with a colon and a space, so that when this program is run, I actually see some information that's letting me know that I need to input information here. And so maybe I say 101. While you're older than me, I don't believe you. Interesting that we had two different outputs. Why was it that we got two different things being triggered? This should also happen if I type in a number that is negative, like -1. Huh, you are younger than me. Liar. Both of these were triggered because each of these are separate if statements that are all checked. Each one of these is checked when I'm running this scenario. So what would happen if I actually only ever wanted one of these messages to pop up to the user? Well, here's where our else statements come in. I can chain these together and bind them into one long set of logic by adding else in front of these other statements. This means that only one of these is going to end up running, and we start from top to bottom. So the first thing my program is going to do is check if the number is greater than 34. If it is, it will do this, and then it will do none of the rest of the content. Because it's all chained together, only one of these will run. However, if this fails, it will check this. If this fails, it'll check this, and it'll continue down until either one of them succeeds or we reach the end of this section. And I think we've included every possible number, so there's no way we won't hit one of these scenarios. But now, if I were to say that age of 101, wow, you are older than me is triggered. So I have a bit of an issue here. This, I don't believe you, is not reachable because if I'm older than 34, you're older than me is printed, but now that this is chained, this will never be reached. So there's a couple things that I could do here. I could put this first in the logic, changing the order around so that this is a priority over the top one, or I could add another condition in here with these joiners. The double and symbol means and the double vertical line means or. And I can have combinations of logic playing out here. So for example, I could say if the number is greater than 34 and the number is less than or equal to 100. This means that this will not be printed if I'm over 100, like I see down here. And just by adding this second scenario, when I press run, if I now enter 101, 101, I don't believe you is printed. This is skipped over because both of these conditions have to be met. So these joiners that allow multiple different pieces of conditional logic to be on the same line allow me to kind of customize the logical flow a little bit more. And in this section, you're going to have some problems where you practice making some more complex combinations of logical operators just to practice here. There's one final piece that we usually offer for these long chains of if and else if statements, which is just the else statement at the very end, which means that if everything failed, at least say this. Now, in this situation, we already determined that we've covered every single number, so why don't I delete this one that's less than 0 and see how this plays out. Now, I have if the number is less than 34, but I don't want it to print out you're younger than me if it's less than 0. So I'm going to say and number is greater than 0. Maybe I'll say greater than -1 because I'll let 0 count. That means that I've dealt with the older than me range, the younger than me range that's above 0 or above. I've dealt with equal to me, and I've dealt with kind of absurdly old numbers. Meaning that this else, and I'll add a little comment here, this deals with any value below 0. And it's in here that I'm going to say below 0, you liar, just to make it really clear. Let's just double check that this works in the conditional logic. And I'll type in -1 again. Below 0, you liar. So else is that final cleanup crew. If nothing else happened or worked in the chain, this will be the final thing that always runs if everything else fails. And there's tons of complexity in terms of how much we can manipulate different triggers and situations with these if statements and else if statements. But the real core principle here is that we need to know how to write just singular if statements and then chains of statements that contain the different branching conditional pathways that we need our code to have.